on the bug. You guys caught the
Yeah.
okay. So you wanna speak to that?
So I didn't really fix the bug. I found out that if writing to the persistent store is done in parallel, then we see the bug.
I see.
And all the writes are on different channels, and I'm not sure why this is happening. So now when writing in sequential, then we don't see the bug.
I see. Okay, well, I mean, there's a, so you probably have a solution. One, there's a range of solutions that I can contemplate. One is we make an interface to the store that collects all the rights, right? So it's not like you're actually writing to the store, but it says, from the point of view of the client, our side's call, it's written to the store, and now there's a bunch of rights that are recorded as needing to be written to the store. And then if LMDB offers a bulk right, then you can assemble the rights into a bulk right.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say that I'm not sure that LMDB offers like some kind of batching.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely.
That would be the solution, right? It's like,
yes.
Yeah.
Now we have, because we have inserts and deletes, there is a cache in between persistent store and just the changes that should be written. So, and this is not the part of the problem. So because I changed this part and to see if this is the problem, but no, it's
yeah, understood.
Something closer to persistent store. Yeah, I will definitely take a look to see if this can be done in batches. And
yeah, like if LMDB has a bulk right, I mean, then and if we do that, then what we can do is, if it turns out that LMDB does not offer a bulk right, then we can swap over to a different store.
Yeah.
Because it's just ridiculous that we can't write in parallel. But this, I think, in general, is the problem that we're going to be facing until we have a parallel target, which is what I've been saying for a long time. Is that all of our work is basically bottlenecked by how concurrent the actual target is, and all the way down to the chip level, the concurrency is actually messed up. The instruction set for both ARM and Intel is not actually parallel, right? The instruction set is sequential with a threading model on top of that. And so the right thing to do, which has been the case now since 2005, when we recognized that Moore's law was over, was to come out with a concurrent instruction set. That was the right architectural path, right? And it's really the industry legacy that has prevented this path. And so, it's up to some group to bite the bullet and show that this can be done. So that's kind of that's why I have, since 2003, been pursuing demonstrations that you could use the pi calculus as the basis for such a design, or use the rho calculus as the basis for such a design. Because ultimately we're going to be hampered by how well the underpinning can handle the concurrency. Casper, for example, I think also needs a another design revision, because I don't think that it's contemplated properly in the context of concurrency.
Yeah, and now also the block stuff are intertwined with Casper, which Casper should not care about block validation or this kind of stuff. This is not the work of Casper. So
Um,
maybe.
yeah, something like that. I mean, it does care that I mean, if attackers are trying to impact the protocol by sending invalid blocks, then that really is proper Casper territory. But I do understand the separation of concerns you're worried about. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And now we have a block store, which is just a file that we are appending, and we cannot query blocks for some specific data inside the block. We are loading blocks always, so, and then the whole block. So. And also executing deploys in parallel, which shouldn't be the problem, right?
Yeah.
I mean, can we find out conflicts between deploys before execution?
Yes.
Or...
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. And this is in part the whole point of the other, the behavioral type stuff. So nice segue. Let me go ahead and do a screen share, and I'll talk about some of that. So the first thing I want to do is, where's the row come? All right, so the first thing I want to do is remind everyone, so if we have a simple pi calculus process like this, so you have a process that's listening on X for Y and then does nothing. So basically it's just guarded by the action of getting the data off of X. And then on X, we're going to send a fresh channel U, right? So that's kind of the simplest closed pi calculus process. Well, it's not completely closed because it's still, it's got a free X. If you put a new X on the front of that, that would be the simplest closed pi calculus process. When you encode it down to the Yoshida combinators, you get K of X is running in parallel with new X message U on X. And then when you run it through the new elimination protocol, you get down to you're gonna forward X along this namespace P of R. So P is just some parameter that we've given, which is some name, and we're shifting it into the R side. And N is also in that same namespace. And so this is the fresh name. So it's just some parameter that's been shifted into the R side of some namespace. So you can think of every namespace as always able to shift things right or left, which you could think of as tacking on either a 0 or a 1. Or if you need URLs, you're tacking on, a /0 or a /1 to your name.
Okay.
Right? So that's the way to think about it. So this forwards X along P of R. So what that means is that this in R will ultimately be available to this K of X, which is how we would, get rid of things. So essentially, if we ignore the forwarding, assume that these are in the same namespace, because the next step is to run this forwarding, which will then get you K of X to M of X in R. So if we just want to run that and see what kind of typing that gets. So here is the kind of typing that we're contemplating. So we want that if you give enough R, enough gas to K of X, M of X, A, that will type as 0. So in order to get this, we had to do a cut. So we want an M of XA over here and a bang K, where so K is composition, parallel composition, of K of X and the box, right? So that, and that has to be M hat to the left of an arrow 0, right? So if you give me something of this type, I can guarantee something of type 0. And then the question is, how do we get one of these guys? And so what we're looking at is a rule of the form that if you know that you've got something that here, I'll bring it up. It's not that one, this one. If you know that you've got something in the target of the rewrite rule that is of type tau prime, and that depends on something being of type tau, then you can get a context that will go from tau to tau prime, and that's what we're contemplating here, right? So I've got something like a banged context with something in the left and a hole, and that gives me the hat mxt to 0, right? So that has to be the target, and this is the thing that would be on the right hand side. So so the rule is a little tricky. In particular, we don't have the definition of the rewrite rule when you've got a box. So currently, what we're so specifically, here's the theory we start with. So it's got a rewrite rule from a couple of terms to a term, right? Where the source of it has to be K of TU. So K is our, in the case of the row calculus, is par, right? And the target of this is whatever you make out of this. So so in the case of the KX MXA, that would be 0. The F of TU would be the 0, but it's some function on the structure of the terms. So what we can do is contemplate an extension of the rows which take context. So we'd have to consider a context on the right and the context on the left. And that's essentially what we're doing here. And the reason to do that, find it, here it is. And the reason to do that kind of thing is because we need to filter what goes into this hole by the type. So we want to ensure that whatever is going into the hole satisfies the type first. And as long as you can guarantee the tau prime, if what goes in satisfies the type T, that matches with our model theoretic definition of arrow, right? So that's this one. So in other words, it's all of the terms U such that you can find a T such that U is essentially a context, a banged context with the hole on the right. And then whenever you got a U prime of type tau, then if there's a rewrite such that when you fill the hole in U, so that's this one, with U prime, if that goes to V, then V has to be of type tau prime. So that's exactly what we're saying. if you give me something that fills the hole, give me something in tau that fills the hole, this goes to tau prime, right? So that's tau arrow tau prime. That's the idea. And so we want to reflect that in our context formed rewrite rule, right? So if it turns out that filling the hole with something of type tau gives you a tau prime, then leaving the hole in place is of type tau arrow tau prime. That's sort of the nature of the rule. But what that means is that our rewrite rules have to be expanded to include these things. So that's the work that Mike and I have been looking at over the last week from a research perspective, making sure that we've got the model theory right. So and the model theory lines up with the type theory, in this hand in glove style. Any questions about what I just said?
Can you say from the perspective of rolling how this we are typing a par expression, right?
Yeah.
And what would be the whole in this par expression?
So the whole is like, think of it as, for blah 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 par whole, and you're going to fill that with an output.
Oh, so whole can be send for this for.
So think about it, right? So here's a row calculus or a rolling expression, right? And what we're trying to do, and we've gotten rid of this new bit, right? We're just simplifying it down. We're saying no, we're not worried about the new right now because we know we can get rid of it, right? So, and since this thing just throws away whatever it gets, right? So it waits on X for Y and then just doesn't do anything. So that's equivalent to the kill, right? So 4 with a 0 continuation is a kill. Yeah. All right. And then, so you're running a 4 against an output. Well, an output corresponds exactly to a message. Right? So MXU is output on XU. That's the way the combinators correspond to the language things. All right, so the whole in this case, so K is par for, and so the big K, I should be careful. So let me grab the other. Where is it? This one. Okay. So we're looking at this thing. So big K is par. Bang is turning an expression with a hole in it into a kind of lambda-like thing, right? So you can fill the hole. Right. So application is defined.
This is like a parameter to this.
Yeah, exactly. So this is so T is going to be little k of X. This big K is going to be the par. So little k of X par, and then something. Right. So, and we want to be able, and what we want to insist is that whatever we fill the hole with, it has to be of type tau. So what we're saying is that the target of the rewrite rule has got to be tau prime whenever the hole that we fill here is of type tau.
Okay.
Right. So that gives us that this thing is tau arrow tau prime. So that's the rule that we're contemplating now. But what it means is that we're going to mess around with in this contextualized theory. We're going to mess around with the rewrite rule. So the rewrite rule is going to go from being something that's essentially first order to something that's higher order, because it now has this extra parameter with the hole in it. So that's what That's what we're contemplating right now. And if we're able to convince ourselves that the contemplation is correct, then we have, oops, sorry. Then we have this thing. We can type it, right? So this is our basic process. Send a message. This is output A on X. That's what MXA is. Running in parallel, that's the big K, with kill whatever you get on X. Just drop it on the floor, right? And if you give that enough gas, so this is the Rolang, right? This corresponds to the simplified Rolang. And if you give it enough gas, then that has to go to 0. That's the meaning of this. And it takes no additional typing assumptions to verify that. In other words, this is valid in all contexts. Right? And
So this is,
go ahead.
This is like a fully normalized term because it ends with 0, and you cannot do anything else with that.
You can't do anything else as long as, and what the type system will do is it will insist, in general, for isolation-like properties, if you have another one that could interfere with this, it will insist that it's shoved over into a different namespace, as an example. Or it won't give you, like, for example, if you have another K of MXB, so you have K of MXB, then either that thing will be starved of the gas, right? So it can't interact, or it will be shoved into a different namespace. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
So that's how you get isolation, as an example. So that flipping it all, or looping it all the way back to your original question, you were asking, can we determine whether or not you've got conflicts before we start packaging these things up for running? And yes, we can. This can happen at the point of compilation.
Oh, nice.
Yes, exactly.
Cool.
That's and it's much better to have it happen long, like it would be much better to catch any sort of interference, like the interference in the DAO bug, long before we get to deployment. Right? Yeah. You want to catch it in testing. So, and the best place to catch it in testing is if you catch it at compilation time.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so go ahead.
From the perspective of implementation, what we are comparing, do we have just AST to compare? I mean, this is not enough because we need the whole store.
No, so you can think of the store as representable as an AST, right? In fact, that's what's in the store effectively, is an AST. So if you need, so the store would correspond to some typing assertions to the left of the turnstile.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So that's assumptions about your environment.
I see.
Yeah. So yeah, the whole system has been, I've been contemplating this for a very long time. Basically since I saw Abramsky's talk at the OOPSLA Ottawa conference in 1991. So 30 years.
Long time.
Yeah, it's a long time to be thinking about this. Yeah, and recognizing that I mean, the point was recognizing it that you need this kind of system in order to program the internet, right? So the internet was not even like, there wasn't Yahoo, right? There wasn't the Netscape. There wasn't, you know, anything like that back when I was beginning to envision this thing. So, you know, at that time, we at MCC, we'd all envisioned the commercialization of the internet. We all realized that it was going to, you know, completely transform modern society. And so, and I recognized that programming the internet was going to be extremely problematic because we have all of this concurrency and we see those issues, right? We see that it costs us billions and billions of dollars each year because we're not ready to program concurrently without a lot of extra tools. Yeah. Most of that, what stands in for those tools corresponds to conventions. Like, so they're particular conventions for how you build a web application that is 24/7 available. Yeah. Right. And so, but if we had tools of this form, then we could let go of many of those conventions and get better performance. So that's the sort of large scale scope of these things.
So this is will be supported in Venus or Saturn?
In Venus. So, I mean, the reason I've been working on this is so as aggressively as I have, is that when we get, you know, all the Mercury backlog done, what we want is to be able to hit the ground running with an implementation, right? We don't want to have any more design questions about Venus in the way, at least with respect to this feature, right? We want to be able to say, okay, this is the design, here's the math, here's how it all fits together, right? So, you know, so we expand the syntax of Rolang to include the typing syntax. And then we expand the functions of the compiler to check the typing judgment. And in Venus, we don't have to do any sort of type inferencing. We say, you know, if your code comes with a type, then it has to type check in order to compile. If it doesn't come with the type, we run it as is, right? It's all on you.
So, you know, I guess these typing systems require a certain amount of mathematics to figure out. And I've always been attracted to the idea that composability is going to let me like take a type that doesn't have deadlocks in the top and a type that completes in bounded time and put them together and they'll work.
That's the idea. I mean, that's what you're looking at when you're looking at this thing, is that the compositional rules, right? So to calculate whether or not this type works, you need to go calculate whether or not that judgment works and whether or not that judgment works. And here, this is an axiom, so you need go no further. Your calculation is done. To calculate whether or not this typing judgment is true, you run backwards through this rule, which is this rule here. So you run backwards through that rule, and you then have to calculate this. Well, that's an axiom. Then you have to calculate this. That's an axiom. More generally, all of these rules are compositional, right? So in order to calculate whether or not this such a typing assertion is true, you need to calculate that this is true and calculate that that is true. By running the other way, if I know that this is true and I know that this is true, then I can derive that this is true. So that's the whole point of the structure of the typing system, is that it is in fact compositional. And the interesting thing about this that's different from the other typing systems out there is that this typing system keeps explicit track of where gas is applied. So for example, Mike and I recently adapted this rule right here. So this rule is about wiring things up in parallel versus wiring things up in series. So here I've got some parallel composition or some K, right? In lambda calculus, that would be application. In pi r rho, that's parallel composition. In other things, who knows what it might be. But so I've got some K that is connecting T3 and T4 to be run together, but it's stuck because we haven't got any gas. So we've packaged it up as a tensor, right? So we're saying that T3 is of type tau 1 and T4 is of type tau 2. Now over here, we've got an extractor, right? So you can think of this as data destructuring, right? So when I whack one of these against one of these, I want to be able to pull out the data and reconfigure it and run that. So when you've got a par operator here, as opposed, so those are the upside down ampersand. So that's the linear par against a linear tensor, then you get the parallel wiring. So that means you're going to wire T1 with T3 and T2 with T4. The other way you could go is wire T1 to T2 and T3 to T4, and then wire up the result. That's series, right? So think of it just like electric circuits. Now to be super, super clear, we're going to wire this one to this one and run that, and wire this one to this one and run that. And we're running those in parallel. And then whatever that results in, whatever this wiring results in, is run against whatever that wiring is results in. So that's what's down here. So T1 with T3 gets enough gas to run. T2 with T4 gets enough gas to run. And then that results in something that will get enough gas to run. Now let's see, does it actually end up with this type? Well, what is the type of T1? Well, the type of T1 is give me a tau 1 and I'll produce a tau I perp. Okay? T3 is of type tau 1. So I plug the tau 1 into here and I get a tau I perp. Right? So that's what will, the result of this expression here, so the RK T1 T3 will be the tau I perp. Now, if I run the T2 wired up with T4, what's that type? Well, T2 is of type, give me a tau 2 and I'll produce a tau I. And T4 is of type tau 2. So I plug the tau 2 into this one and I get a tau I. So the result of this thing is a tau I. The result of this thing is a tau I perp. So a tau I perp with a tau I is just the RK and we're done. Right? And you show, and we've seen that we get exactly and only the gas necessary to result in that type. No more gas, no less gas.
I have a very basic question as far as the notation that I'm looking at for each of the equations with so that dividing line, what's in the below the dividing line, that's the composition. This isn't like in a numerator where you have the numerator and the denominator and the denominator is divided into the numerator. That's not, it's just simply the dividing line is to separate the each of the you have the
let me help you out.
okay.
Your question is spot on. The short answer is yes, you are correct. The things above the line are the hypotheses, and the things below the line are the consequent. Right. Okay. So you can read this line as a if then expression.
Okay.
Right? So if I can establish these things, then I can deliver this.
Okay. Things like that. That's helpful. In thank you.
Yeah, sure. No worries. Now for the more complicated, it turns out that things of that form are actually very similar algebraically to numerator and denominator. But
Okay.
I didn't want to confuse you. This this is not a division in the sense it's not a naive notion of division, but it turns out that is very like a kind of division.
Okay.
That would be a good question to bring up, Steve, in the category theory work study.
Yeah, and just to kind of announce, so we've kind of put together a group of us studying category theories, led by Isaac Dufresne. So we're reviewing the video catalog of Bartosz Milosevic, and he's an amazing teacher, presenter. So, and there must be 40 videos on category theory that we're all kind of working through. And just by, I've maybe watched 10 or so, but watching those videos, I'm starting to get, a lot of the terms and language that we talked about here in Casper Standup. I'm getting a understanding and definition of what those terms and language uh, are, what they mean. So, math is a language, so I'm learning what the language is. So by watching those videos now, listening to the discussion here, it's actually moving me much further along in my understanding. So
Yeah, so when we think about category theory, we're actually it is helpful in checking to see whether or not there's a kind of consistency in systems like this. So here we're going to say that the objects, we're going to build a category. So Mike and I are in the process of building that category, and the objects in that category are going to be the things to the right of the colon.
okay.
And the morphisms are going to be essentially the things to the left of the colon, including the things to the left of the turnstile. So, and composition is going to be cut. So,
Okay. Cut meaning what is in that denominator. Composition is below the line. What's in the denominator, the result, as you had mentioned.
more specifically, when we have things of the form, I've got a tau perp and I've got a tau.
Okay.
Then I can wire them together. So I've got a morphism that ends like this, and I've got a morphism that ends like this, and so they can be wired together.
Okay.
Now, to give a category, you're going to need a little bit more structure. So you're really going to need an arrow has got to have sort of a beginning and an end, right? So it's going to look like one of these or one of these. So a tensor or a par. And so this would be like the left side of the arrow, and this is the right side of the arrow. And you have to be careful because if you can flip these around, then you have to assign a direction to it. And then what you're in order to wire things up, in this case, you would need this to be a like a tau 2 perp, and then right, so decorated like this, and then you'd wire it with something that is a tau 2 and the tau 3, and then when you wire them together, the perp and the non-perp thing, they disappear. Right, and so in the same way that in a morphism from A to B,
Mhm.
composed with a morphism from B to C, is a morphism from A to C.
Right.
So the B part disappears, right? So
Okay.
here's your A, here's your B, here's your B, and here's your C, right? That would be the way you'd wire them up. But
Mhm.
then the notion of cut is really important, because it's the cut part that makes the tau perp and the tau disappear. That's the thing that's really important. There are other things that could be composition, but what we're saying is that it is wiring things up. Cutting is the term of art.
Okay.
When we glue them end on end together, it has to be, and our insistence is that when we glue them end on end, then we wrap them in an evaluation context, and it's the evaluation context that does all the hiding of the intermediate step. That's the important bit, and this goes to Abramsky's idea that composition, that categorical composition is parallel composition plus hiding.
Mm.
And that's exactly what we're seeing here. So K in the pi calculus or in the row calculus or row combinator interpretations is parallel composition. And R is giving enough of an evaluation context to run that thing. But Abramsky's idea was that it was that the hiding operation, right? So wrapping it up in a new. So what we're saying is that that's not sufficient, and that turned out to be a stumbling block for interaction categories. That was never able to fully realize the Abramsky program, the interaction category program. But when you divorce the evaluation context from the new context, then you can recover the Abramsky program. So, and that's essentially what we're saying with this paper. That gives you the categorical interpretation and a wider categorical context.
Okay. But you, in your opinion, with those of us who are going through these category theories of Bartosz, and there's, like I mentioned, 40 or 50 of these. If we go through the videos and start to get in that foundation, would that get us closer to understanding your paper?
It'll help. So just so we're clear, category theory stumbles when it comes to concurrency. Category theory as a notion is decidedly functional, and it has to do with this idea of morphisms that have two ends.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you think about it. This underlying metaphor says, if you think of morphism as a computation, then the left end of that arrow is the parameters to the computation, and the right end of that arrow is the output of that computation. So that's a very functional view of computation. It says that computation takes stuff in and spits stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
That's the view, and that's what's all throughout category theory. But let's think about that in terms of what we know about modern day computation. So what is the output of the sliding window protocol? It doesn't have an output. It guarantees a property, right? So the property is of that particular channel, you get exactly once in order delivery. Another way to really bring the point home, I could say, what is the output of the internet? The internet doesn't compute.
Right. Okay.
Doesn't compute an output. It's a collection of protocols that guarantee that everybody can work together, right? TCP is a protocol. It's not a function.
Right. These discussions are helpful as far as understanding the philosophy and motivation, because originally my thought was that with your paper, it was building upon or expanding upon the principles or foundation of category theory, but that's not necessarily what you're aiming to do. As you just said, category theory is more dealing with functions, but what you're ultimately trying to get to with this, sliding door is, identify a property. So there's category theory is where we're kind of learning helps us to kind of speak the language, but even so, we're not getting the full picture. We're not achieving what your motivation is with your paper. But with this discussion, I think I'm starting to understand it now.
Yeah. So now to put the pieces together. So there's category theory. There's type theory, which is independent and was independently developed from category theory. They're related. There's connections, but they're independent. And then there's the theory of computation, and as a sub domain, concurrency theory. Right. And so the theory of computation was developed independently of category theory. A lot of theory of computation has been improved by its interaction with category theory, but it is independent. And in particular, category theory stumbles when it attempts to explain concurrent phenomena. And so like one of the critiques that I levied in 2015, when Mike and I published our Hydra paper, on the outside, it looks like, oh, here's a nice categorical model of pi calculus-like phenomena. But if you actually look at the paper, the amount of machinery, of category theory machinery necessary to explain this simple phenomena of the pi calculus is enormous. There are only maybe 1,000 people on the planet who regularly work with that much machinery. So you're going to be at the category theory lectures a long time in order to get to something in category theory that is rich enough to explain the phenomena of the pi calculus. However, so very specifically, if you walk into a high school and you try to teach them the category theory necessary to understand the pi calculus, you will be sorely disappointed. You will lose your students' attention very quickly. However, what I demonstrated was I could walk into high schools and have students programming in pi calculus in about 45 minutes. So there's something about the concurrency theory presentation of this model of computation that is effective and efficient.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been hesitant to go to these category sessions, except that they are fascinating, because category theory has a way of making really complex common sense.
Well, yeah.
It's like you take something simple like pi calculus and you put it in category theory, and wow, it's going to strain your brain.
Yes. However, I want to put a plug in for category theory. So category theory is an appropriate level of abstraction for a whole bunch of phenomena. Okay, so there's lots and lots of phenomena, like the notion of freely generated, right? So the idea of an adjoint situation where you have things like monoids that can be freely generated, or things like the languages which are given by a grammar, which are freely generated, right? So that's well captured in category theory. The notion of a monad is a particularly powerful idea. It's an extremely powerful parametric notion of composition. It doesn't get you like my assertion for a long time has been that the right presentation of category theory begins with the monad. And so a lot of people would argue, I think, like on the face of it, they would say, well, in order to spell out a monad, you have to have a notion of natural transformation and functor and all of that stuff, which is like, it's second order category theory. It's not sort of elementary category theory. But what I would point to is Wadler's paper on comprehension syntax for monads. And if you look carefully, you'll see that this idea of monadic comprehensions has reappeared in computing over and over and over again. So SQL as a language was discovered completely independent of category theory. The designers of SQL were not thinking about monads. They were not thinking about category theory, but they did stumble upon the language of comprehensions. The same is true for the X query, the flower expressions, that you don't, in order to understand the X query comprehensions, you do not have to understand category theory. If you did, you would understand that there's something underneath. If we go, so that's computing. If we go way further back to set theory, set theoretic comprehensions was discovered long before category theory was a gleam in anybody's eye, right? This was hundreds of years ago. We get the set theoretic comprehensions. So over and over again, the language of comprehensions is discovered historically, and the language of comprehensions corresponds to the dominant form of monads. Most monads can be thought of as a comprehension, and that's why Haskell can make such heavy use, and Scala can make such heavy use of the language of comprehensions to provide a syntax for an extremely wide range of phenomena. So if you understand how comprehensions de-sugar, whether it's in Haskell or Scala or whatever, you're understanding something deep about monads, and category theory can help you there, but it's also something that lands with human intuition independent of the category theory presentation, right? So it's something that you really have. So when you have a phenomena like comprehensions that bubbles up into human calculations over and over again in all these different disciplines, you really have to pay attention, right? And so I would argue that notion of comprehension is a natural, naive presentation on which you can build category theory, with monad as the basic unit of presenting category theory. So this is a really I don't know how to say it. It's like it's a subtle idea. It takes a lot of understanding of history and all these different computational phenomena, but it results in a very practical reorganization of category theory. And once you have that practical reorganization of category theory, then category theory becomes a lot easier to apply to things like concurrency theory, because it's not so functionally organized. So in particular, now I can give you the specifics of what I'm saying. The reason I ended up with the, oh, it's probably way down here. It's what, down in the appendix. Here we go. Here we go. Right here. Come on. There it is. All right. So the reason I ended up with 4 comprehensions for row calculus was because through experience, this is really painful experience for me. I started with Milner's syntax for the pi calculus and just transliterated it into a programming language syntax. So the asynchronous pi calculus is the core of Xlang, which is the heart of Microsoft's BizTalk process orchestration. And what we discovered through application and lots of experience was that pi calculus, on the one hand, is terrible at joins. It is syntactically very awkward to express joins. You have to do a lot of coding to express joins. That's why Cedric Fournet invented the join calculus, because he also noticed that pi calculus is terrible at expressing joins. On the other hand, most human parallel processing involves fork join patterns. I've said this in these kind of contexts over and over again, but it bears, like once you get it into your bones, then you start to, you can start to make progress. You don't have to think about these kinds of things. They're just always available to you. Right? So think about paper reviews, right? We've got a draft paper in front of us. The paper review process, how does it work? You take a copy of the paper to 3 different reviewers. So that's the fork part. They do their independent reviews in parallel, right? That's the fork part. And then all of the results are collected by the program committee, and that's the join. If you want to think about another human process, how about getting a pre-approval for a loan, right? So you want to buy a house. So the bank asks you for 2 things. It asks you for the title of the place that you're contemplating purchasing, and it asks you for your credit history. Those 2 checks are run in parallel. It's fork, right? You can in parallel process to see whether or not there actually is a building or a lot at the address associated with the title, and you can independently from that check the credit of the applicant, and then you join them, you bring them back together, and then the loan officer makes a quick determination, right? If you just go through all of human processes, the vast majority of them are fork join. There are a few that are fire and forget, but most of them are fork join. So if you've got a calculus like the pi calculus, which is terrible at joins, it's really bad for describing human processes. So that was a major mistake on my part. I picked a calculus that was ill-suited to the domain, but I didn't know that at the time because I hadn't got enough experience with human processes. I've been thinking a lot about, computational processes as opposed to human processes. And now, but if you look at the row calculus, it includes this understanding. Why? Because in order to express a join, all I have to do is to take this part here and allow that to be iterated. So semicolon and another one, semicolon and another one. And in fact, if I allow for different syntaxes, I can mix and match when the guards here can be in parallel versus in sequence. So imagine I have a bar here. So, and I have an X prime and a Y prime, then the bar means it doesn't matter what order you get the firing on X and the firing on X prime. And the semicolon means that you have to do one and then the other. So now the syntax is completely, nicely, simply expands to meet the domain requirement, right? There's nothing to it, right? Very, very straightforward. And at the same time, it lines up with monadic desugaring. So that's exactly the point. So category theory has a role to play. Its notion of monadic desugaring and comprehension language is beautiful. It has a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole thing. So if you really want all of this, I've gone on and on and on, but Steve, if you really want all the pieces to understand what I'm talking about, you need category theory, you need concurrency theory, and you need type theory. Okay. All 3 of them. And part of the reason I'm focusing these days on the type theory is because we need that now. We have a dramatic need for it in order to make sure that our chain is safe and row line contracts are safe. But at the same time, there's a deeper reason. Now, I'll just briefly mention that, and then I have to jump over to Dev Standup. But the deeper reason is this: there's Fields medalist Voevodsky proposed a new approach to type theory, which includes the univalent principle, right? So the homotopy type theory has been a very active area of research for the last decade. It was proposed by Blavatsky, who died a couple of years ago, but it gives a new foundation for a notion of types. That notion of types is still too functional. And so what I'm trying to do is to give an alternative characterization of types that is both practical, gives us important, safety features, liveness features, security features, and also gives us a notion of classification, yada, 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 but is in contrast to the homotopy type theoretic perspective. And I believe that when you rub those two perspectives together, you'll get a much better foundation of mathematics, because they will inform each other in terms of going all the way to the ground, and all the ground of the mathematics, right? So what we take as our mathematical foundation, and all the way back out to a wide range of applications, so that we can do things like make sure that blockchain contracts are safe. So that's the effort. That's the scope of the effort. And that gives you a sense of the kind of background that you would need to actually understand what I'm talking about.
This was very helpful, Greg. I certainly appreciate it, and I'm sure I speak to the others as well.
Oh, no, I appreciate the opportunity to chat about it. All right, I got to jump over to
Yep.
Thanks, Christian.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.